People. Let me hear somebody else. So if you are just joining us, if you go to this website, Menti, I set up a little question forum where you can pop in a question that you might have. Specifically, I'm going to spend some time talking about the paper and the critical lenses. So if there's something with those that you want me to spend some time on, just jot it in that, it's sort of like a whiteboard situation over here. And I'll touch base on it before we finish today so that I can make sure everybody's questions get answered. You can also put it in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask me. We have many ways to do questions. So I wanted to start with this week. This week is a wrap up of short fiction. We're going to be finishing up our short fiction terminology and moving into poetry next week. So we're going to have, instead of a short fiction test, we're going to have a little assignment, and then you also have the paper in progress. So I want to talk about those things today. A few updates right here. So I'm sure that you got my notification on Google Classroom that they're extending the date that we will start hybrid to at least the 26th of October and maybe later. So that's why I'm still here in my dining room instead of over in school. Mr. Ramos is up at school. I don't know. He says he likes it better, so for teaching. I don't know, but he's over there. So the teachers can go if they want to, but I figure, you know, it's more comfy to be here at home and safer probably. So anyway, there is one exception to that, and that is if there are any students that don't have internet connectivity or don't have devices, then they can start going up to school starting tomorrow. They're going to open the computer labs and staff them. And so students who haven't been able to participate in school yet can go up to school and start to get up to speed with their classes and their teachers and that sort of thing. They think that there's about 75 kids on our campus, but the reason I'm telling you, because obviously if you're here, you don't have that issue. Maybe you know somebody who has that issue. So if you know somebody in your family, in the neighborhood, at church or something, who they haven't been doing school because there's no internet connectivity, even with those hotspots, sometimes where you live, there's no signal or not enough of a signal to do a Zoom call. So if you know somebody who's in that situation, have them call their school. This isn't just for East, this is, you know, district-wide, and see if they're opening up the computer labs so that kids can come in. They're going to socially distance and masks and all that, but there is a population of students that they're going to start letting into campus. So maybe you could be aware of anybody that you can help out with that information. What else? College fair, I posted this last week also. There's a college fair that the counselors invited you to. And hopefully you're in your counselor's Google Classroom. If you're not, you should be, because they post all kinds of stuff like when the reps from the different universities are coming and when different events are taking place. So if you're not already in theirs, I think you can get to it from the webpage right here. Somebody told me yesterday that our college fair was yesterday, but I got the feeling from the counselors that it was all week. So if you go, I'm kind of posting announcements and things over here in Google Classroom. I use it for that mainly, and reminders. So if you go here under classwork, I have the week's reminders, and what I've been doing is updating them and like kicking out the ones that are old and bringing in the ones that are new each week so that you get notifications on your Google page reminders. But there's a thing for the college fair right here. So if you wanted to check that out and see if it's available, they're going to have like 300 colleges there. Juniors, that might be a good thing for you to do, especially if you don't know what school you might want to attend. You've got a lot of options there. So hopefully that's still happening and isn't over from yesterday, but these are instructions, and then over here is the website. So just an FYI, if you're interested in that. Seniors, you should be working on your Apply Texas, just a reminder. I've been receiving essays sort of sprinkled throughout my day of people who want me to look at their college admissions essays and give them feedback. So if you're working on yours and you want some feedback, you can send it my way and I'll do my best. If if you're working on your essay, remember that I made a seminar here that you can use to kind of guide you through that. The counselors are sort of expecting that you'll be finished with your Apply Texas and your FAFSA by the end of October. FAFSA opens on Thursday. That's your financial aid application. So I put a link here also for that. There's a PIN that you need. You have to like sign up and then they email you a PIN and then you use the PIN to sign in. So you're gonna wanna do that. Everybody does FAFSA, so every year. So you can see what your, well, the big number that you need to get is your estimated family contribution. A lot of scholarships will ask you for that information from your FAFSA. So even if you don't think you're going to get any money from the federal government, A, you might be surprised, and B, you still need the estimated family contribution for a lot of the scholarships that you'll be filling out. So just a heads up on that. Juniors, you can file that away for next year. All right, any questions on any of that update stuff there? All right. Well, let's move on and talk about our stuff for this week. This is a transition week. We're going to be finishing up with short fiction and moving into poetry. And I want to help you wrap that up and also move along on your paper. So for this week, the only thing I really assigned for you, I made it kind of light so you could start your paper, is I asked you to look at 2 more critical lenses so that you have a total of 5 critical lenses to work from with your paper. So I thought that I would go through, I put them all right here so that you have them in one little, I was going to say clump, but that's sort of gross. One little section. So let's talk about these 2 that are the new ones, and then maybe I'll do a little review of the other ones just to reinforce those ideas. So one of them that you were supposed to look at this week was the feminist or gender perspective. And if you notice, these slides are set up so that the first thing that you read about is sort of like a description of that lens. But then after that are the questions that you would ask, and they even go on to the second page here. The questions that you would ask, sort of ask a text in order to get ideas through that lens. So the reason I put those questions on here is because if you are thinking about for your paper, using a particular lens with whatever it is that you are, whichever story you've chosen, you can go into that story once you've read it and start asking yourself these questions about the text. And if you start getting really interesting answers, then you can answer them in depth and you've got lots of ideas, then you know that it's a lens that will work with that story, because not every lens works with every story. But if you try to apply a lens to a story and it doesn't work, like you can't really answer that question, that really doesn't come up in the story, then you know that's a lens not to use with that story. Don't try to force a lens onto a story if it doesn't belong, because you're not going to be able to say anything about it really. So you have to match up, the lens with the story. It has to actually have those components to it. So the feminist gender perspective, that's what these questions are on here. The feminist gender perspective is about power, and really so is the Marxist one. So that's something to keep in mind, that the feminist or gender perspective is set up to acknowledge that men and women have not always had equal representation in literature or in society or in a lot of cultures or government or any of those things. So historically, there is an unequal power dynamic when we talk about men and women throughout history, and probably still somewhat true today, and definitely true in other countries. So we acknowledge that in this lens, and we look at the power dynamic between the characters. Like in a story like Yellow Wallpaper, right? There's a very strong feminist gender influence in that lens, because we can see that the husband is completely dominant over his wife. I mean, he hides her away in an attic and locks her in. That's pretty oppressive. So you're not supposed to do that. You'd probably get arrested for that these days. So the idea is that there's an unequal power differential. This lens has also branched out into sort of gender identity elements in recent years because we have, you know, gender fluidity is more mainstream. So this lens also sometimes looks at traditional gender roles and non-traditional gender roles. In other words, if a character is taking on the opposite gender roles, what does that mean? And how does that play out in the story, and what effect does it have in the piece? So traditional gender roles being reversed or something like that is another element that we talk about with this gender perspective. Okay. Is there anything else about this one that I can go over for you? Every one of these PowerPoints has these questions that you can use, and then there's also videos that you can watch on further study in case there's one that, you know, maybe you're just like, I need some help wrapping my mind around that one. There are these extra elements on here to help you with that. All right, the other one that you looked at for today is the Marxist or social, sometimes called economic perspective or lens. And this is similar to the feminist and gender lens because it's also about power. And this one is called Marxist because it's rooted in the work of Karl Marx, who was a political theorist. And Karl Marx is like the father of communism, but like the concept of communism, not communism as it played out in places like, you know, Russia and Cuba and China. So this viewpoint says that there's a differential in power between the wealthy class and the working class, and that the working class has that the wealthy class dominates the working class. And I think that we can definitely see that in our society today. People work for minimum wage or barely living wage, and other people make millions of dollars off of that labor in manufacturing and all kinds of things like that. And so we still see that power differential, but this way through economics and what people are able to afford. This viewpoint also talks about how people behave based on economic factors, the way that people behave. And that's a pretty wide-reaching thing. That's number one on this critical assumptions list. The idea is that, well, it's kind of multifaceted. The first thing is that people behave and are motivated by economic factors. People decide to go and get a job because they need money, because they have a girlfriend, or they want to buy a car, or they, you know, have a child they need to support. There are motivating factors that are economic in life. And I think we can all know and see those things. My parents won't buy me the newest iPhone, so I'm just going to go get a job and pay for my own. So those things motivate us as humans, and those determine our basic economic lives. But we're also motivated by our economic status. In other words, the way that we act and what we value very often comes from where we are on the hierarchy of the economy. If I am a wealthy person, then certain things are appealing to me and certain things are not appealing to me based on my economic status. Same thing if I make $10,000 a year. They're not going to be the same thing as, you know, the billionaire. The things that I value in my life are different based on my economic situation. So all of those things make this one a little bit complicated to look at. But if we look at number 3, I think that's the basic element there. And that is that literature is a product of social and cultural conflict. We read pieces of literature very often because the conflict is on social norms. These two people don't understand each other because they're from different societal structures, or they're from different backgrounds, or they have different economic needs or cultural needs. And so that's how this one works. And when we think about this one and also feminism, we mainly focus on conflict and the nature of the conflict. So just like the other ones, you can go and start asking the text that you've chosen these questions for your paper and see which ones start to yield for you interesting ideas that you feel like you could write a paper about. And then that would be the lens that I would choose. Questions on that? Questions on Marxism? Well, I mean, Marxism is a big old concept. Maybe you read some Marx in your history class, but in this case, we're just looking at it as a literary lens. No questions?
No questions, Miss.
Okay. All right. Well, I know that you already read it, so. Okay, so I want to review these other three. Particularly, I want to review archetypal because I asked a question last week on the formative that required you to think about the nightingale and the rose using the archetypal viewpoint. And the reason I'm asking those questions is because I want you to get used to writing about and thinking about those lenses in what we read. And so some of the responses, you'll see that my commentary is designed to kind of like correct misunderstandings about what archetypal viewpoint is. So let me talk about that one, and then I'll talk about the other two just as a refresher. So when we talk about the archetypal perspective, what we mean is that it's like a standard element. It's something that we see in a lot of places. It's something that pops up a lot. And we read about that in the book this summer, right? There are things that show up in literature that the reason your professor understands them and recognizes them is because they've read so many other things. And so they can go, oh, well, that's just like this other book, or that's just like this one, or it's a combination of this one and that one. And it's because they just have more experience with reading. So when we say something's archetypal, we say that it goes back to the basic quality of the thing. Here's an example. In The Nightingale and the Rose, the two characters, the student and the girl that he's trying to impress, are both kind of like the essential young person. They both have the qualities of pretty much every young person that ever existed, because it's at the age when you're a teenager that you're sort of, you know, focused on yourself, trying to figure yourself out. You might be oblivious to the sacrifices of others. You might be quick to anger. You might be melodramatic. I mean, that student is kind of like, oh, where's a rose? I can't find a rose. My life is ruined, right? And if you're not like that, I'm not saying everybody's like that, but you've been in the cafeteria enough times to see that there are people like that. So the characteristic that's happening and the characterization that's happening is we have this stereotype of youth and a young person. Even the girl is like that. She's materialistic and she's kind of like, oh, well, I decided to dance with this other guy who's going to give me a better present. So bye. You know, like you can just see the characteristic of youth in that. If you're still acting like these two when you're 40, nobody wants to be around you because you have a time limit on how you get to act like that. And then you have to grow out of it, right? So the story ends up then being a commentary about youth, and the characteristics of youth is what's archetypal about that story. We can see, maybe not to that exaggerated point of the student, but we can see these qualities in almost every young person at one time or another. They're the quintessential, essential embodiment of what youth is. And so archetype means that it is, you know, seen it before. This is how young people are. This is, you know, just the basic qualities of that element. We can see it in the bird too, but the bird doesn't represent youth, right? That nightingale represents the sacrificial, almost parent. And I don't know how old you were when you realized how much your parents might have sacrificed for you, but I remember I was about 20. And I noticed that my mom had a hole in her shoe. And I asked her about it. And she said, well, it's because I haven't bought shoes for about 4 years. But I knew that I had new shoes. So it started to dawn on me the sacrifices that were made silently. And so the bird then comes to represent that element that we see through history and life and other pieces of literature, that sacrificial parent type that cares more for someone else than for themselves. So when we talk about archetype, that's what we're talking about. The old sort of standard, the character that keeps popping up over and over again. It can also be a situation. Sometimes there's a situation that pops up. In 56 to 0, We have the archetype of, you know, the all-conquering football hero, or the football hero that's down in his luck, except that T.C. Boyle reverses the ending. And instead of giving us the victory at the end, he gives us not just defeat, but worse defeat than the last game. Because if you're paying attention in that story and you're counting points, the whole point was that Ray Arthur wanted to get a better score than 56-0 to go out on top. Well, or at least not as bad as the last game. And if you're counting the points at the end, the score is 57-0. So he gets it even worse. But that goes against the archetype then, because the archetype of that story is like Rudy and all of those, you know, Remember the Titans, all of those stories where, okay, there's adversity and we've got problems, but we're going to come together, and then in the end we're going to win and the whole town's going to be happy for us. That's the archetype. That's the thing that we see so many times. But T.C. Boyle goes against that and yanks that away from us and says, what if that doesn't happen and it's worse, and our hero ends up with his face down in the snow, almost dead. So archetype can be something that's followed, and it can also be something that is worked against in order to make a point. Hopefully that makes sense for archetype. These things are not easy. You're not just going to immediately get it. Sometimes it takes a little practice and a little talking and working out before you get there. If you decide that you want to use the archetypal perspective and you need some guidance, then just touch base with me before you know, next week, and I'll help you with it. The other two, hopefully that's a good refresher. The other two are reader response and new historicism. Reader response is like the default. Reader response works on anything, because reader response is like saying, how do you interpret this based on your own experiences? You've been writing that in journals in English classes for years, because the teacher will ask you, oh, make a connection to this text to your life. And you'll look at a character or a situation or something in the story and make a personal connection. That's reader response. So you can do that with any text. Reader response assumes that there are two people needed to make the message. There's the author who's sending it, and then the reader who's receiving it based on their own personal experiences. And so how they receive it is the way that they can manipulate and understand the story. So that lens works with anything. So if none of the other ones work for you, then I would try reader response. New historicism works with anything that's not modern, because new historicism says that we have to look at the lens of a work through the time period in which it was written. We can't say, take our 2020 mindset and put it on, you know, the husband in the yellow wallpaper, because he's not of the 2020 mindset. So we have to put ourselves into the lens or the perspective of a person living in that time. It's hard to do if you don't know enough history, because if you don't know, like say a story takes place in the Industrial Revolution, but they don't say that in the text, this is taking place during the Industrial Revolution. You're just supposed to pick up on clues and know what was happening historically at that time, and how, you know, children were exploited, and the growth of industry, and what that caused in cities, and the differential in people living in the country versus people living in the city, and all that stuff that they tried to teach you since middle school. So new historicism means that we have to look at that lens. We have to take it from that perspective and look at it, because the author is also a product of their time, right? Charles Dickens is writing about his time during his time, but for us, it's the past. So we have to kind of switch off 2020 and switch on that time period in order to fully understand the characters. It's not fair to hold those characters to a standard that's 150 years after their time. So that's kind of like just another little rundown of the 5. Are there any on there that you want me to spend a little more time on that would help you with your paper? Speak now or forever. No, you don't have to speak now. I'm here to help you. All right, nothing in the chat. Then let's talk about the paper. By now, I would think that you have already started on the paper. Maybe you have chosen which story you want to use. Maybe you have also narrowed down which lens you want to do. A few people have contacted me, not with an entire draft, but with like an intro or a thesis statement or something like that, that we've been going back and forth and talking about the viability of it, that kind of thing. So you can feel free to do that if you want to run it by me. I'll give you my feedback on a thesis statement, an intro, or a rough draft. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But all the PowerPoints are linked here for each one of the lenses. Plus there's material in your textbook on the lenses also. And so I put those page numbers in there. But by now I would think you know which story you're going to do, and you might be between a couple of the lenses trying to make a decision, but you should be at that point if you haven't already started writing at least a draft. Let me go through this. I know I went through this the other day, but I want to do it again because it makes a little more sense once you started with the assignment. So do make sure that you set up your paper in MLA. By that, I don't mean the documentation, because you're not really doing any in-text documentation, but in terms of page formatting. So I put a link here to help you with that. This is what I'm expecting. Maybe last year you did a lot of APA and you need to get back into the MLA, hang of MLA. Maybe you've never done MLA, but this goes through the details of the font size, the margins, how to do the tabs, and how to do the first page. It should look like this. You don't get to do it any way you want. When I receive it, it should look just like this. You should have up here in the header with the pages rotating. You should have the heading here with the date in this order. You should have a title that's not underlined or bold or anything. This is what the first page of your paper looks like. We don't do a cover page in MLA. So I linked to that so that when you get to the point where you're ready to turn it in, then you can go to that page and just make sure that you meet all of those requirements. And then, like, that's another thing. If you finish your paper by, I think it's the 5th, which is next Monday, I will look at a draft with you. I'll look at it and give you some feedback. And if MLA is one of your concerns, then you can tell me that when you share it with me and say, can you just make sure that it's formatted properly? I'll go through it and tell you ahead of time, oh, your margins are off, or you need a header up here. Oh, that's free of charge. But then when it's due on that Saturday, that's that. You will have a works cited, but it will only be the short story that you're using. You should not be using outside sources. You're not going to what somebody else has to say about this text. This is a analysis essay, so you're doing the analysis. I already talked about thesis statement. There are some sample thesis statements on page 2 that I went through last time. They're still here. So you could see what those look like to help you. The length is pretty strict. You need to be at least to the bottom of page 4. Really, for it to be full length, it should go a little bit onto page 5. It should end somewhere on page 5. And then you should have a page 6 that's your works cited. We don't count the works cited in the page numbers. So if it's short of page 4, then it will lose points because it needs to be at least to the bottom of page 4. If it's over 5 pages, same thing. It needs to be between 4 and 5. If you write it and it's only 2 pages long and you think you've said everything, then that's a good time to share an essay with me too, because I can help you extend your thesis so that you have more to put into the body. Or likewise, if it goes over, we can figure out how to streamline the thesis so that your paper fits the 4 to 5 page requirement. The ideas in your paper, it should be your own original thoughts about the work. I mean, you can go and read what other people have to say about it, but it's just their opinion. So, don't get that mixed up with what you say in your paper by accident, because that's when you start to have plagiarism issues that are unintentional. You can unintentionally plagiarize. If you read a whole bunch of other people's stuff and then it makes its way into your paper in a prevalent way, even if you don't intend it, it can still show up as, too much like somebody else's idea. So just keep an eye on that. I already talked about this, but time frame. The final draft is due on the 10th, which is a week from Saturday. Until next Monday, you can send me a draft, ask me to look at it. I have to make a cutoff that's early because what people tend to do is I'll get a few, I already have a couple, I'll get a few more in the next couple days. Over the weekend, I'll probably get a handful because people will wait until the weekend to get really, finalize stuff in their paper. And then I'll get maybe 10 of them on Monday. Well, it's going to take me a day or two to look at those 10 legitimately. So, I want to do a good job of giving feedback. So it will take me a day or two to get them back. And I want people to have time to work on them and make them final papers before they're due on Saturday. So I have to make the cutoff on the 5th so that I have time to address them. It's not fair to me for 10 people to send me their papers on Friday night before the papers due. I'm not playing that. I should tell you that I will be looking at your paper for comments, but if you give me directions, like if you say, oh, I'm not really sure about the way that the body flows, or I'm not sure if I'm repeating myself too much. If you tell me that, then I'll look for that specifically and put your fears to rest. But I'm not going to be editing. So don't expect that I'm going to fix all of your commas and your punctuation and your spelling. I'll just make a comment that says you need to proofread. I don't do that. I don't fix all the little things. Grammarly is good for that. There are lots of tools that you can use to help you with that. But it does affect the grade of the paper. The rubric is here. I can go over it with you. The scoring guide is here. So if I notice that you have like the same issue, like if you make the same comma error over and over and over again, in a comment, I might try to teach you that, but I'm not going to go and fix all those commas for you. That's something you should have been doing a long time ago. So the way that the scoring works is with the criteria over here. And then obviously you want to be over here in the exceeds expectations. So you can use this before you even turn in your paper and say, oh, I need to make sure that it does these things. I need to use MLA properly. I need to structure the essay that enhances the message. I need to make sure there are no flaws in grammar, and I need to make sure my thesis is complex but clearly stated and supported and explained. And then you can look and see how that's different from, like a C or a B. So the reason that there's a range here is because you might not be all in one column with your paper. Maybe 3 of them are in this column and 1 of them is over here. Maybe everything else is good, but there are, like 4 errors in the paper. So that's going to be more along like the 87 range, not the 100 range. If it dips into this column. If it dips into this column, then it's going to go down even further the overall grade. So you don't want to write a paper that does these things or these things, really. I'm assuming that you want to be mostly over here. But use this as a guide to help you while you are working to make sure that you're striving for that highest grade. What else did I put on here that would help you with the paper? Just a reminder that we have 2 papers this term, and together they're worth 40% of your semester average. So in a way, this paper is 20% of your semester grade. So keep that in mind while you are working and preparing, and that's why I'm offering to look at your drafts for you free of charge, but you have to plan ahead so that you can do that. I've got a lot of students. So I will look at your paper and give you feedback if you plan ahead and get them into me. The second page here is all about tools and tips and things that can help you with the paper that I put together. We went over these thesis examples last time, so they're all there. Also in your textbook, if you're thinking to yourself, okay, I get reader response and I understand the story that I'm using, but I don't know how to make them go together. You can go and look at these examples that are in your textbook. So in your textbook, somebody is writing a reader response reading of Kate Chopin's The Storm. You can go and see how they structured it, the kinds of things that they say, but also the slides will help you because of the questions that are on them. So there's a reader response, a feminist, a Marxist, and a new historicist reading that you can look at as an example. I know that you might not have read these pieces, but I don't know, you can either go read them or you can just, just see how they structure the essay and what they tend to focus on and that kind of thing. Here are some other examples. I should just take this one out because I put all those above it. These are some other papers that are examples of literary analysis paper. They're not examples of this particular assignment. Oh, I hate it when that happens. Let's look at this one. So there will be a paper that some professor has put up on the website, and then there'll be comments on, you know, what the instructor is saying about the different parts of the paper. So this is, let me make it clear that the papers in this section right here, other literary analysis paper examples, are not responses to this particular assignment, but they are literary analysis papers. So you could probably gain some insight from looking at some of those too. After that comes some resources, things like, you know, writing a good introduction. There's a lot of videos you can watch if you know that you struggle with conclusions. There's a video on that. So there's some tools here to help you. And of course, I'll help you too. The last thing here is academic integrity. Please make sure that you're separating any of your own ideas and using those in your paper and not rehashing ideas that you have found elsewhere. I cannot caution you enough that this paper is about your opinions about the story that you're reading. So any questions on the paper? Let me go over here and see if anything. So the essay is explaining the critical lenses. No, the essay is explaining how one critical lens helps us to view one of the stories on the list. Right, so these two are kind of asking the same thing. So the paper is asking you to choose one of these lenses and write an analysis of one of these stories. So, but don't just pick them randomly. You have to pick the ones that work with the stories. So if you decide, say, to write about this short story, The Things They Carried, New Historicism would be a good one because that story takes place during the Vietnam War. Right? But you could also use the gender viewpoint because it's about men at war, and you can talk about, you know, that perspective. So no, you should only be talking about one lens. You're going to decide which one goes best with the story, and you're also choosing the story that you want to write about. I mean, I picked these stories because they all work with the lenses, at least one lens. I'm not trying to trick you, and one of these stories doesn't work with one of the lenses. So they all have ways to work with the lenses, but you have to find it. If you don't see it, then pick a different story, right? So that you can have something solid to say about it. Let's see if there's anything else over here. Well, we have to submit the final draft, right? Yeah, that's the way this course works. This course doesn't allow for rough drafts in the gradebook. So I do offer to do that for you because I know that it's helpful for a lot of people to get feedback when they're in their process of writing. But no, I'm not grading a rough draft. You're turning in the final. So you can work on it on your own and turn it in and take your chances, or you can work on it, get it to me by the 5th and get some feedback so that you know what you need to target before the 10th when you turn it in. If that makes sense. If there's anything else you can think of, this is the code up here. You can just go to menti.com. It works on your phone too, and you can just put in that code. And I'll touch back on this. I do want to talk about this week's assignments. So I'll come back to this in case there are more things before we sign off. But any questions on the paper? I know I've been through this twice, but I'm just trying to make sure, since we only have one day a week, that we are able to touch base. I wanted to make sure that you hear me talk about these things a couple times. Everybody's good?
I have a question.
Okay.
On the critical lenses, you know how you put like questions? Do we answer those questions based on the story?
Well, you could do that as a process for determining your thesis. Like you could go to the PowerPoint. I linked them here too. You could go to the PowerPoint, like when you're trying to figure out which lens would work with the story that you want to write about. And you could go and start asking yourself these questions, but the answers to these, like you're not writing out the answers on a piece of paper, but maybe number 3 right here really helps you think about a character in the story. And you're like, I didn't think about it before, but that character is like a Christ figure. And it really starts getting, your mind going on that topic. Then that could produce a thesis statement. So I would use these questions more as a brainstorming technique than I would for an essay writing technique, if that makes sense.
Yeah, okay. Yeah,
Okay. Because a lot of people will try to fit like a random lens onto a random story, and it's not always going to go. And then the paper is just like a mess. So you want to pick the one that really gives you lots of ideas, and then you know which one to go with from there. That's a good question. Any others? I always wait an extra minute because it takes people a minute to unmute their thing. I've been in a lot of meetings where they're like, any questions? Okay, moving on. I'm like, I was going to ask a question. All right, so the paper's ongoing. You have a week and a half to continue working on that. But I want you to do an infographic assignment this week to wrap up short fiction before we start poetry next week. And then I want you to read just a couple of pages from your textbook to prepare for our study of poetry that starts next week. So let me talk about this assignment. This is to demonstrate that you understand the fiction terms. And I didn't want to make a test. I think tests are just weird in this environment. Am I wrong about that? It's weird. I'd rather do a cool project. Well, I think it's cool, but stuff I think is cool, generally, I'm outside of the cool realm, so I understand this. All right, so what I want you to do to show that you understand the fiction terms, and I've listed them all right here. I kind of summarized some of the basics from the text and all the reading that we've been doing in these modules. I want you to create an infographic. Now, you've seen infographics before, maybe you've made one, but I did put a link here to show you some examples. An infographic is where we take data or information and put it in a graphic structure. So this one is an example, well, it's not on our topic, but it's about yawning. And so you can see that there's some text, but there's a lot of graphics, and things are graphically organized so that it's easy for somebody to look and get information from this visual. There's another example. You can see this one's almost all visual. There's a few little textual elements, but most of it is explained using visuals. That's something about reading the lines on your hands. Here's one that's on social media or something, and it's structured differently. So I'm sure you've seen these before, but what I want you to do is create one for one of the stories that we have read in modules 1 through 5. And I put a list of them here on page 2 so that you can refresh your memory. So I'm not asking you to read a new story here. You're already reading a new story for the paper. So I want you to go back and look over the stories that we read already. And I want you to create an infographic where you explain the elements that are listed here as they pertain to that story. So you can organize it in whatever way makes sense to you, but there should be something on the infographic for each one of these bold items. And it will depend on the story, right? You should already have notes on the stories and references. You've been thinking about the stories because I've been asking you formatives. So go back and make a collection of all of these elements and how does the protagonist antagonist conflict work in this particular story. And so you make a little graphic section of your organizer for that. There are some examples here. These are not examples of this assignment because I made up this assignment. There aren't any examples of it, but these are examples of literary infographics. Did you guys read Animal Farm? Maybe? Sometimes they read it freshman year or in middle school. So here is an infographic, and you can see that they've set up themes, and it's dominated by images. That's why they call it an infographic. So there's information on it, but it's dominated by images that help you navigate through the visual and then through the information. So you can see that they've set up themes here in the middle with a big old icon that represents each one. Up here is kind of like identifying characters. That's about the author. You don't really need to do the author, but here are some motifs. So you might be thinking to yourself, oh, that looks fancy. I don't know, I don't draw pigs very well. None of the stories are really about pigs. There's one on Julius Caesar here. You guys read Julius Caesar in English too, right? The Shakespeare play? They stab him? Brutus? No? All right, well, you can at least look and see how this one is set up. So you can see that they've organized it around some scenes from the play. Here's where they're getting ready to stab Caesar. Themes are here. And so this one's just organized a little bit differently. Now, there are some good websites that can help you create these infographics, because when you turn it in, you're also going to be posting it so that your classmates can look at your work. So I'm sure you want it to be top notch. So there are some resources here. I really like Canva. I use it for a lot of things. If you haven't used Canva, your mind's about to be blown, but, or maybe not, maybe it's just me. But if you go here to Canva, I already searched up for you all of the infographic templates that they have, and there's over 100 of them. So you can just go to whatever one you think closely resembles the information that you want to present, and you can just click on it. And then you go over here to use the template, and you can totally customize it. You can change all the colors, you can change all the text, you can use their images. Say I want to get rid of that image, I can just delete it, and then I'll go over here and I'll look for, let's say I want a leaf. I'll just search for it. And the ones with the crowns are their proprietary ones, but they have free ones too. Oh, here's the leaf I want right there. Oh, it's too big. And you can just resize everything and put it where you want it. So you pick whatever template works for you. And then when you're done putting all of your literary elements for your story in there, then you can come up here to the download, and you can choose JPEG, PNG, PDF, whichever. And then that way you can upload it as your assignment once you download it after you're done with it. So Canva is pretty amazing for that kind of thing. And it just goes on and on and on. There's tons of them. So it's a way to make your ideas about the devices and the textual qualities look professional, and set it up whatever way you like. There are some other sources for this. For example, you can also use a website called Venngage, Visme. There are others too. You can just search for them, but I don't think anybody matches Canva. Canva is just super easy to use, and they have a lot of elements that you can customize. So that's one way to make it. If you wanted to make it by hand, I guess you could, but that might be time consuming. So again, here's a list of all the stories that we read and that you can use for this little project. And then I already made the rubric here, so this is how it's going to be scored. Same thing, look in the column, figure out what the qualities are. Oh, she wants for the format to make the ideas presented easy for the viewer to understand the information. Oh, okay. These are all the qualities. The objects have to help us understand. The topic has to address all of the elements that are on the assignment sheet. The accuracy, it needs to be an accurate interpretation of the text. Grammar and punctuation and spelling is going to count. So if you know all that, then you can make your project fit that column, because that's how I'm going to be grading it. So I would like for you to do that for Saturday. Let me hit it over here. And you should continue working on your paper as you can, but you have another week and a half on that. Don't forget your formatives this week. And before next class, I want you to read a little bit of background on poetry. I put some pages there. I think it's maybe 5 or 6 pages. Read and take a few notes on the opening chapters of poetry, and we'll work with those on Tuesday. The assignments are here, so you can submit them. Well, the paper you might, I don't know if anybody's ready to submit it, but it's there. And then here's the infographic assignment. Let's see if there are any more comments over here. Is there anything else or in the chat that y'all want me to talk about with any of these things? Can we send our working draft as much as possible? Oh yeah. Yeah, some people we go back and forth a few different times because maybe I make a suggestion and they decide to try it and they want to know how is it, and yeah. Think of it kind of like workshopping in the classroom, right? You know how if you have a day that you're writing in class and the teacher's kind of like walking around and helping everybody, you might not need help. Maybe you're just writing the essay and you're good and you're ready to turn it in at the end of the period. Or maybe when you're writing, you're kind of like, as I'm walking around, Miss, could you read my intro? What do you think? And like getting feedback. So it's kind of like that, as many times as you need. It does take me, like, it's not immediate, especially if you know, you guys stay up late and work on stuff. I'm not much of a middle of the night person. If I'm up in the middle of the night working, I'm not usually grading papers. So yeah, it usually takes me a day to get them back, unless I have, it might be a little more than a day if I have a bunch of them. If I have more than 10, then it might take me, you know, a little longer, but usually my turnaround's about 24 hours. Or the other option is if you wanted to do like a Zoom meeting, we could look at the essay together and I can walk through it. Either way. I do a lot of voice notes. I have a Chrome add-on that lets me just like highlight something and then make a little 1-minute voice note to you. So you might get it back and it will have just me talking about that thing. My voice is faster than my fingers, I guess. Anything else?
I think that's all, Miss.
Okay, this isn't the last time that we have to talk about it. We have next Tuesday also. So if anything comes up between now and then, you can let me know. You can also stick around. I'm about to end the meeting, so you can stick around and ask me more questions if you have them, okay? All right, I hope you all have a good week. Have a good day. Go out and enjoy the weather because it is beautiful outside. Breathe some fresh air. I'm looking forward to it without getting all sweaty and choking the heat. All right, y'all take care. Let me know if anything comes up.
Bye, Miss.
Have a good day. Bye.